see where do we stopped. So I already covered a few parts of our mock exam. And yesterday I also uploaded the let's say comprehensive summary. Basically here I try to cover the key points that first of all that are directly relevant to your future let's say empirical work, and next they will be directly related to the exam, right? So basically, the structure will be the same as we cover in the mock. So for each question, for each part, in total, we will have 8 parts, right? And for each part, I will ask some questions. Basically, it's asking your, let's say, your understanding. And of course, I don't expect you to memorize everything and right now, but more or less you get the idea, and then you could tell me, for example, you could write the keywords, right? And again, if it's correct, I will try to give you partial points along the way. There will be when questions where we, let's say I ask for your understanding, and next, maybe I will ask you to interpret, let's say, the coefficient, right? Or later, maybe in the graphs, I will show you, and then you tell me what is the value for maybe for beta, for the interaction terms and the like. Maybe what is mm, uh, how to say what is the coefficient in our D&D regression, right? Um, and what if we include the leading terms, right? The leading terms where we want to test the pre-trend. We do not want to have trends prior to the treatment, right? We want to see that after the treatment takes place, the treated groups will observe some effects, right? And as we already discussed in a few papers, I think in at least one paper, that for differences, the authors do not look at the average effect, but basically they look at the dynamic effects. That means each year may have different level or different magnitude of the effect. And that's why they include some lags in the model. Yeah. Okay. And so I want to ask if you have for now you have any questions so far?
Hello, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, doc. Yeah. Yeah, hi, good morning, Happy New Year.
Mm,
Sorry, doctor, just
okay,
want to
good.
ask, I understand that we will follow the same structure as the mock exam. However, are we following the same weight? Because I can see in the mock exam, right? Say for example, the last question regarding the papers, right? Is only contribute like a very small contribution. But then, like
Yes.
in our actual cost, right, actually we spend a major part in covering the 9 papers. So are we
Yes.
expecting the same kind of weighted in the real exam?
Mm. Okay, very good. So let's say for now, I do see that for the papers, it's relatively I would say small, right? It accounts for only 6 points. In the official exam, it will account for maximum 10 points. The reason is I will tell you very soon that we discussed the paper, we discussed the motivation, the identification strategy, and the likes. It's in terms like it serves as a mean for us to understand the concept, the methods, right? I've been thinking about that quite a lot, and I also talked with Professor Ulrich Schriver, and we do not aim to have like maybe 1/3 of the points to ask you, like, let's say, only about the papers, because it turns out that you will have like motivation, or you will be forced to memorize the paper, and that is not the maybe a good way, right, to test your understanding. And that's why in the exam, we try to keep it a very, let's say, proportional, like a very small proportion of the total points, to make sure that you understand the maybe the motivation, the challenges, also the identification strategy, right? And basically, you just write down your understanding. You do not need to memorize. The only thing I think you need to keep in mind is the main variables, right? What is the variable interest, the X and the Y. Um, but you also notice that even in other parts, we will ask you in a very, I would say, practical way, right? That you do not memorize. So in short, to answer your question, yes, the papers part number 8 will account for less from 6 to 10 points maximum. And we do not ask you to memorize the numbers, basically the findings, right? Yes, in terms of finding, maybe you could tell us about the increase or decrease or something like that, but you do not need to memorize any number from the papers, right? Please focus on the motivation, the challenges. What is the challenge researcher have been, let's say, experiencing so far in, let's say, solving, in answering the questions. The research question is also important, and also um, the main variables and main results, but no need to memorize the numerical one, right? Just tell us very briefly. Basically, we want you to have to grasp an idea what is the key problems researchers in corporate finance field are facing. You understand, you get the core point, the core challenge, and how they overcome that, and that's totally fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can I ask something further? So
Yes.
like so beside the 9 papers that we cover during the
Mhm.
course, are we expected to at least have some idea on the remaining of the papers? Because I can see in Moodle there's quite a numbers. And say for example, like for some interpretation or some
Mm.
kind of like techniques, right? I do feel like some people are very comprehensive, and if it is like the first time I see it, right, it might be quite challenging to do the
Mm.
interpretation within like 6, 7, 8 minutes. So are
Yes.
we expecting the same kind of difficulty level in the real exam, or will the interpretation part be more streamlined?
Uh, so I would say, regarding the difficulty, um, so like there's one part dedicated for the 9 papers that you presented, right? And for all the parts, um, I think, I would say the difficulty level ranges from easy, or and then medium, and regarding the very difficult one, I do not plan to, and indeed, I do not ask you any papers outside the slides, right? And also, if I want you to interpret the numbers, something like that, then maybe I'll just ask you about the coefficient, right? And the two important one that you should master by now is the statistical significance. That is the exact coefficient, right? In the regression table. And next, we want to know whether this statistical significance actually translates to real impact. And that's why we compute the economic significance, right? I do not, again, I will not ask you to memorize, but I will give you the regression tables. I will give you the materials that you need. Then you could base on that and you calculate. Yep. So that's one thing. So regarding the scope, we will cover only papers um, discussed in, or let's say like covered in the lecture slide, but not all of them will be asked. Maybe a few important one, very, very crucial one. For example, regarding the finance and growth paper, right? It is I would say not only um how to say similar, but also classical, right? So you should by now have some idea about how to say the relationship between let's say financial developments and growth, right? The channels, what are the two opposing views, right? About this relationship. And also, so if you want, then maybe I encourage you to start with the summary, because here in the summary, I try my best to cover the very condensed and key points. And for others papers to let's say foster your understanding, then just maybe just focus on the slide, right? And maybe on the topics that already narrowed down. I know that the set of slide is quite comprehensive. The set of slide we cover more than 200 slide, right, in the lectures. But the majority of them, or I would say half of them, are to explain the method to you suitable for everything, but maybe perhaps then maybe and then in the exam we will cover the same thing, right? The with the same mindset, no memorization, but you should be able to, let's say, when you look at the regression table, you know what is going on. Then you look at the graphs, then you know that, okay, so maybe before we dig into any test, we have an idea of, let's say, um, what the directions of our um, how to say what's the direction of the effect, what is the side of the beta so far, right? Okay. But I would say that regarding the actually this how to say the idea of the papers or the concepts that we want you to master is more or less is focused on um financial development and growth, right? We cover the four channel and also the two views. Also, then maybe you check on the slide again. Um, what are the four measures of financial development, right? So in research, what are the key one that the key measures that researchers have been using, right? They may use the assets of financial intermediaries over GDP or private credit over GDP. They also look at stock market capitalization over GDP or stock market turnover ratio, right? Maybe just the idea what is measuring. So for example, the assets of financial intermediaries over GDP is to measure the size, right? To let's say quantifies the size of the intermediary sector. How about the ratio of private credit over GDP? That the loans to private firms or to household relative to the economy, right? Or stock market capitalization uh, divided by GDP means the size of our equity markets, right? And regarding the stock market turnover ratio, trading volume divided by market cap, it serves as a liquidity measures, right? And how about the, let's say, it's testing your understanding. So maybe the reasons, there are two reasons why there may be too much finance, right? And that's bring us to, first of all, that is the nonlinear relationship between finance and growth, right? Because now we see that the growth will increase and at some point it will decrease, right? Beyond a certain size, additional credit growth can reflect lavish booms, weaker screenings, or some speculative activities rather than the boost in productive investment, potentially lowering the long run growth for the economy, right? And the next one might be the rent seeking, right, and talent diversion. When a financial sector is oversized, that means it's too big, it could attract high skill labor, right, into zero sum activities, maybe regulatory arbitrage, maybe excessive tradings, and by doing that, it extracts the rates, right, the fees, the markup without proportional social benefit, right? So those are some, I think the area where you are required to, let's say, to have some keywords in mind. But for other parts, maybe I will give you one regression model, right? Y equals alpha plus beta x1 plus beta 2x2 and the error terms. Then I will ask you about the interpretation of beta 1, right? And also please always keep in mind that when we interpret the coefficient, two things which we want to keep in mind at first, on average, right? So on average, an increase in X leads to, let's say, beta increase in Y, right? If X increase by 1 unit, Y will increase by beta unit on average, and also ceteris variables, right? We already covered that. Ceteris variables mean keeping other factors constant, right? The two important assumptions we have to keep in mind. Then I will ask you, what is the, maybe what do we mean by linear, right? Is that linear in our explanatory variables, or it is linear in dependent variables, or it's just the requirement in linear is parameter, right? That means we focus on the linearity of data, and then maybe mm, let's say the how is, or say what is the representation of beta, right? And this is, so by now you should, let's say, already comprehend that, right? Beta is actually the covariance divided by variance of x, right? Covariance of y and x divided by variance of x, and it is indeed the slope, right? So maybe from that regression, I show you some graphs, and then you tell me in the graphs what is the approximate, just approximate, you don't need to write exactly, right? Value of the coefficient, that is the slope of the line, right? And also the intercept. Yeah. And what else can we think about in terms of testing your understanding? Maybe like after seeing the coefficient in the, like from the graph, we could see what is the consequence of let's say inconsistent standard error, right? We already discussed extensively in class that we face a trade-off whether we want to find the true value of beta, right? Or we accept to some extent some, let's say, diversion of the beta from its true value, but most of the time we know that the range of beta is very, very small, right? That reflects in the standard error, right? If the standard error is very large, then let's say it will affect our conclusion of hypothesis testing. Yeah. And then I will, let's say, or you could also think or try to write on your own when you review the problems, review the slide. What happens if we have one omitted variable, right? That means the omitted variable means that variable W is in U, right? And it affects Y, it affects also the X, right? And what if we have a negative omitted variables? That means now the covariance of X and W is smaller than zero, right? Then what will, or let's say, will it lead to some upper or let's say upward or downward bias of the estimation, right? Something like that. Then regarding the functional form, you should be able to interpret the, let's say, the numbers in terms of log, right? If we take the log of X, how will we interpret the results? But if we take let's say, the log of Y, right? What is the, how should we interpret the results? Or what if we take the log of both X and Y, right? Then our model measures the elasticity, right? Elasticity, 1% increase in X is associated with an approximately increase of beta percent increase in Y, right? And what if we suspect that our variable has differential effects? We still have 2 minutes, right? Okay, yeah, then I will try. And then later, please re-enter the room with the same um, link, right, that I already provided in the email. So if we suspect that our effect has different or are different for different groups, then we may think about interacting, right? Interacting X with some variable, and then we interpret the results. And for this one, I already have the tables, right, in the lecture slide for you. And maybe I would just have asked you to measure some effect for some specific value. If X is this, beta is this, what is the, let's say, the marginal effect, or what is the value of the, how to say, the first difference, let's say the first derivative, right, at this value, something like that. Okay. And for cross-sectional, yeah, here is cross-sectional is just another version. We apply the OLS right here in our data. I would then ask you maybe to interpret some results, or and also find the economic significance, something like that, right? And regarding the panel, uh then we let's say we could do the first difference, right? In terms of fixed effect, when we take the first difference model, we subtract the value of the current one, the current period, to the value of the past period. And by doing that,